Welcome.
We ain't afraid of no ghosts.
This is your number one podcast for ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties. Bringing you everything you need to know about things that go bump in the night and interviewing the personalities behind them. Make sure your doors and windows are locked. Now, here are your hosts, your ghost hosts, Scott and Julie.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to a very, very special edition of the Paranormal Project. Now, you know, we come in here every week and we talk to guests from all over the world. We talk to mediums, we talk to people who have been on TV, who are in the paranormal world. Today, we have someone very, very special. As some of you know, I was involved with the theater for almost 30 years, and I'm kind of a little bit of a theater geek. And, you know, when we were thinking about what we were going to do for this show and how could we do something leading into the holiday season, I thought, you know, it's kind of hard. Paranormal, ghosts, and Christmas don't always work well together. But then I happened to think, what's better for Christmas than a Christmas carol? There are 4 ghosts in a Christmas carol. And our guest today has played Scrooge for decades here in Massachusetts at the North Shore Music Theater. And I would imagine he was there even when it was called the Music Circus. So we're going to welcome him today to the show. Dave Coffey, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
Such a pleasure. You know, a lot of our guests, some are here in Boston, but a lot are all over the world. And you come in every year. You've been doing this now. For how long have you played?
This will be my 28th season out of 31 that they've done at the theater. They did it 3 years before I joined them, but I've done it ever since. So
I was going to say, did you start out as Tiny Tim and work your way up?
No, I've been playing Scrooge for years. I started out, as a matter of fact, in high school doing a concert version of a show. And then in grad school, I did a radio production of A Christmas Carol. And then I toured for 2 seasons in the 80s doing Scrooge. And then in 1992, I guess it was, John Kimball asked me to audition for their production. We were doing another show at the theater, Singing in the Rain. And I said, well, okay, what the heck? So I did, and he cast me, and I've been doing it ever since.
That's great. I mean, that's phenomenal. You were there when they had the fire, right? Because that's been within the last 20 years. That was our opening night of Cinderella, that 2005, I think it was, maybe. And we had all gone to the cast party after the show, and I left early because I was actually going the next morning deep sea fishing, which I'd never done before, with some friends up there. And so I got up early, like, you know, about 6 o'clock in the morning, which is early for me. And when I turned on the television, it said fire at North Shore Music Theater. And I went, you know what? Yeah.
And I got a call on my phone, said, come by and pick up all your stuff. We're closed, and we're going to send you home. We have your flight reservation for you.
Wow. It
was really wild. But, you know, they did 2 shows in Boston, and I did one of those, did Camelot at the Schubert Theater. And then they got the theater redone and opened in time for, I think they did Full Monty was the first show they reopened with. And then A Christmas Carol we did that year during, so that we never missed a year then with the fire even.
But COVID probably threw you off a little, right? I would think over the last couple of years.
Yes, we did. We missed COVID. We missed 2 years when the theater was still a nonprofit. The very last year that they were open, they decided not to do A Christmas Carol, that they would try to go for a brass ring and make even more money by doing the High School Musical 2. They'd made a killing on High School Musical 1, and they decided they'd do that instead, and it didn't work out. So they went under. So they were actually closed for a year. So we missed 2 years, and then we missed 2020 because of COVID. We were back last year, and we were one of the few theater companies that actually were able to complete our entire run. Most of the companies had to shut down because of COVID, that they'd have too many people out and they just couldn't do the shows.
Well, you know, I'm grateful you're back because, as I told you, you know, backstage before the show is we go to see you every year. And last year was the first year I took my 9-year-old.
Oh,
And he just little afraid at a couple of little moments. He was not 9 at the time. He was actually 8. And but we just had such a great time. And for those who haven't been there, it is theater in the round. I think the staging that you're able to pull off in that kind of a venue is just, I think, amazing. They keep the action coming from all angles and up and down the aisles and up through the stage. And it's
well, that's the thing. As an audience in the round, you are part of it because, like you say, the actors are playing sometimes in the aisles. A lot of times they're coming down next to you. They'll be, you know, so you're right there with it. You can't escape it, as it were, which is great. But, you know, I say it goes back to that old idea of people sitting around a campfire telling a story. There's something about that, you know, people sitting in a circle listening to a story.
And it really does feel like that.
Special.
It really does feel like that. Tell me about the group. Do you have many people that come in every year and play roles, you know, the same roles? Or
usually it's about half and half. It's about half and half. Now, Cheryl McMahon, who plays Mrs. Dilber and also Mrs. Fezziwig, she started with the original year, the original company, and she had missed a few years doing other projects throughout the whole run. But she and I have both done it for the same length of time. And then Jay Daly, who is our trumpet player in the show and our music contractor, he's done it 1 year more than us. So that we're the longest serving, as it were, in the show. But most of the people, a lot of them have done it, you know, 10 years now, at least. And of course, we've even had instances of people that were kids have grown up and come back and done the show, which is kind of fun too.
That's kind of neat too, to be able to have that family coming back around again. You know, it's nice sitting here chatting with you because you're such a pleasant guy to chat with. But Scrooge is not such a pleasant guy in the first part of the show, I have to tell you. So it's really, you know, to see that both sides of you. And, you know, that's because you're a great actor and you really pull it off. But it's really so well done. If you're in Boston this year, do you know when the show starts?
I think it's right around the 1st, if it isn't the 1st.
I think so, right? I think it's
and we play through the 23rd. We always close usually on the 23rd, and that way I can fly home on Christmas Eve. So it works out great that way.
Beautiful. Yeah, because you said you're out towards Texas or in Texas.
I live in Arlington, Texas.
That's your Dallas, right?
Yep, right between Dallas and Fort Worth, halfway between.
Right where it is. Yeah. Oh, that's great. So when I come out this year, I might send you an email and say, "Can I come say hi after the show? I'd love to meet you in person." You know,
sure.
Such a great show.
It really is. And I had, like I said, I've done other productions of A Christmas Carol, all tours and different theaters. I've done it over the years, but this one is very special. It really is, and it has, I think, just the right mix of the ghost story elements to it, as well as it's light enough for kids, you know, of a certain age. Granted, if they're below a certain age, there are moments in the show that will send them to the lobby because, you know, Jacob Marley, we used to have a wonderful Jacob Marley. He was with us for 10 years. And Tom, he said his whole goal was to see how many kids he could send out of the theater, you know, care of that badly.
Wow. And you know, you've done a good job. And it's great the way they kind of bring him right in over the stage. And it's great. Honestly, if you haven't had
pyrotechnics we have in the show, and the stage, we have a stage lift in the center, and we have things that fly in from above. And then we have our marvelous characters. We call them the Pearlies, although they're no longer Pearlies. They're kind of like spirits that aid the other ghosts throughout the shows, who are acrobats, and they are amazing what they do throughout the entire show.
It's like a feast for the eyes. I mean, it really is. Truly, no matter where you look, there's activity. And, you know, I remember years ago as a child, my grandparents took me to see Ringling Brothers, and it was a 3-ring circus, and you didn't know where to look. And it's almost that same experience. There's just so much going on. They're coming up next to you in the aisle. They're coming down from above and up from below. And it's fantastic.
I consider it kind of like like a Disney ride. It's like you punch the button and it just goes.
It just goes. And you want to do it again and again and again, which you have for a decade, you know, for years and years and years.
I do. I'm now in my second generation. I have kids that I worked with, you know, when they were little kids that have come back and brought their children to see the show. And you don't think that's freaky. That is freaky for me.
Does that make you feel old all of a sudden?
Dang straight. I tell you,
Yeah.
my back all of a sudden starts to feel a little sore, you know?
You know, it's funny. I was looking at your website, and I have it right up next to me over here. And it's fascinating to me because, you know, you play parts like Scrooge, which are just so iconic. But you've done a lot of fantastic shows, including Edna.
Yes, I've done Edna a couple
Hairspray,
times.
which, you know, totally the opposite of Scrooge, right? You don't want to get those costumes mixed up on the wrong night.
Well, she has her problems too, you know.
She does. That is such a fantastic show. Now you're in a show now. Where is that? Is that in Texas that you?
Yes, that's at the Dallas Theater Center. We're doing a fascinating show. It's called Trouble in Mind. It was written by Alice Childress, and it was going to be the first Broadway show written by a female Black playwright in 1955. And she wrote the show, and it was very well received off Broadway, and they were going to give it a Broadway production, but the producers came to her and said, could you change the ending of the show and kind of soften it up a little? Because it's about a Black actress who is dealing with stereotypes and trying to fight that to do a show on Broadway. So it was like mirroring the subject. But she says, did you not read the play? You know, she goes, no, I'm not changing it. So they said, okay, we're not going to produce it. We said the audience is not ready for this. And so it did not have its Broadway debut till I think it was last year at the Roundabout Theater. So Lorraine Hansberry's production of Raisin in the Sun became the first. And I think that was in 57. Maybe, or 59. And but it only took that many years, 60 something years, before she got her debut on Broadway.
So how long are you there? Is it just because now it's already almost the end of October? So
well, we closed the 30th of October. Yeah, we started previews last week, and we have our official opening this week, which is just a short run actually there. But it's at the old Kalita Humphreys Theater in Dallas, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is a really interesting theater to play in. There's not a right angle anywhere in the building. Everything is either curved or an obtuse or angle in the plays. Yeah,
he was certainly interesting. You know, it is his the way he built his buildings and designed them is really interesting. We have family in Dallas. Actually, it's my son. So I'm a single dad. My son is adopted, and his bio family, who we do stay in touch with, lives in Dallas, Fort Worth. So we've been there, we've traveled there, and I need to tell them to come and see you in that show.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
That would be great. I would love to have them come down and see you in the show. And then, so you close out, and then you're off to Boston.
Yeah, we close the 30th, and then I have a partial week to get my house decorated for Christmas before I leave. And then I'm leaving the 4th, and I'm actually coming up and visiting with friends there in Massachusetts. We're going up to New Hampshire for a week to do a little getaway quickie vacation. And then I'll start the 15th, I believe it is, of November in rehearsals for A Christmas Carol. So I'll be up there for basically the month of November and December. So I love it, and I love coming up that time of year.
Yeah, it's nice. Christmas, beautiful. You know, when you rehearse, so you rehearse right here. You know, you do it all right on site. I didn't know how that worked with all your other, shows that you're doing, how you overlap them like that. I guess maybe you don't have to overlap too much.
No overlap on this show at all. Nice. But, this was the very first show that North Shore Music Theater actually produced themselves. Prior to the time that they did this show, it was all tours that came through North Shore back in the old days.
Yeah.
So this was when they had enclosed the lobby and the theater itself. They enclosed because it had a hard shell, but it was basically like a tent theater is what it was. But after they enclosed it and all, they said, we're going to become a year-round theater. It's what we want to become, a regional theater, not just a summer stock, stop off on the tours. And so they spent a whole year developing this show, and then they premiered it. I think it was 1989 was their first year to do the show. And then, of course, there's been many changes over the decades, but it's been a wonderful experience for me. And the audiences could not have been more welcoming and more gracious to me over the decades.
Well, I just know, being a local, that the show is just beloved by so many people.
Oh,
And
totally.
your role and you specifically playing that role. I think if somebody tried to come in, the show might be great, but they would be saying, yeah, but he's not David Coffey. You know what I mean? You really have such a following for that role in the North Shore Music Theater.
Well, and they've been so kind to me. The theater has. I've done over 50 productions at that theater. Now, granted, 28 of them have been A Christmas Carol, but I've done a lot of other shows there over the years. And so people do. They really they know me. I used to say we used to stay in homes in Beverly, and I was downtown one day in the little town. I was going to the train to go into Boston.
Mhm.
And I passed this mother and her daughter. We met like this crossing, and I kind of spoke to them as we met. And then as we passed, the little girl turned to her mother and said, "He's the actor." Well, I thought that was so fun. It's like, we have the butcher and we have, the dry cleaners, and he's the actor.
And
that's what he does.
Yeah, and she remembered you. And,
Yeah.
and it's I told you I did theater, and certainly not to the extent that you did it all, but it was always thrilling when someone would say, "Excuse me, can I have
Oh,
a photograph?" Or "I remember you," or "I saw you up on the stage." And it's such a great feeling. It really.
And I
is.
tell people not to be afraid to go ahead and do that. I said, sometimes you'll run into somebody who, is not very gracious about it or whatever, but 9 times out of 10, people appreciate it. When you say, "Really enjoyed the show the other night." My favorite story, I tore my meniscus on stage during A Christmas Carol one year, and they took me to the emergency room after the performance, and there was a man in front of me that was walking around kind of groaning, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong with this guy, if he's on drugs, what his problem is or something. And they called several of us up to go back to the examination room,
Mhm.
and he was in front of me, and all he had been doing was moaning like this. And he was in front, and they called my name, and he got up there, and he was moaning, and he went, and he turns to me, he says, "Hey, saw the show last Friday. It's really great."
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I said, "That's our audience, by golly."
Oh, I'm telling you, and it's just such a great thing, from theater that you do down to my son who's his little play at school. I think it's great. Get out there and enjoy it. It gives you an opportunity to be somebody different. Not everyone's going to go on and become famous or be on Broadway stages, but it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be. I had taken my son is Nicholas, and I had taken him to, and I can't think of the name of it now, but it's not far from the North Shore Music Theater, and it's a children's theater workshop type experience. And they do shows, and and it was just such a great experience. He was a lot younger at the time, but it taught him about, costumes and how to, play a character. And was it perfect? By no means it was not that kind of an experience, but you can go and have fun. I was quite involved out in central Massachusetts with a theater, and each year they have this theater camp for the kids to bring them in and expose them and introduce them to theater. And they do a lot of these junior shows that you see nowadays.
Oh, yes. A lot of those were actually developed at North Shore Music Theater. You might not know that. Yeah, the gentleman who was over their education department years ago, he went to work for Music Theater International, and he developed a lot of those junior shows, and then he would workshop them with the kids at North Shore, and they would take them down to, I think it's Atlanta every year. There was a convention, and they would introduce the new show that year, whatever it was. They worked with Disney also developing junior shows.
Yeah, because Disney has a lot of those, the Little Mermaid and whatever else they have. They have some of those shows that are just really great for the kids. They're small, and it gives them something to work on over the summer, Well,
and they come with music tracks, everything. I mean, if you're doing musicals and stuff, it's a whole package that you get with it. It's really a neat thing.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think we need to be more exposed to this stuff and get the kids off the video games. I mean, that's okay once in a while, but not all kids are going to be the baseball kids either. They're not all going to be the football kids. That was not me. That's not who I was. That was my brother. And, he couldn't sing his way out of a paper bag or act, and that's fine. But for those of us who, you're kind of a misfit on the football field, it was just never me. This was me. And
but it allows these kids to find a community, a family of their own too. And that helps so many people, especially a lot of at-risk kids at school, to stay in school. It gives them a reason to stay in school because, and keep their grades up and really work, because it's like, okay, I want to go do that show and stuff, and I can't do it if I fail a class. So I really have to work at it and all that. And it's a great incentive. And then, like you say, you find your tribe, as they say, when you work that way.
I'll tell you a funny story. It'll be 30 years ago. I can't remember if it was December or January. It was during the winter, and it was my very first kind of like big show on stage, right? I finished the show, and I remember feeling so horrible that we had become like a family. And, you're at that cast party at the end, and you think, oh, my God, my family. I'm never going to see these people again. Yeah, you will. Well, the next one, 30 days later, there anyway, because you just kind of follow each other around. And so, they really do become your tribe. And over time, I've seen people get married and they stop. I had a child. I haven't done it. And, because it's hard when you're a single dad. And then you have the people that went on and did professional stuff. I have a friend that I worked with, and he's off touring. I don't even know what he's doing now. He's been in all over the place. And another one who's a musician, he's done touring Mary Poppins, and he's done different things. And so it's great to see that talent that they've taken it and they've run with it. And
the nice thing about the business is you will work with somebody, and like you say, you'll form a really tight family, and then it breaks off, and then you'll run into them 10 years, 15 years later and do another show. And it's like, it was the next day,
it was like no time had passed in between.
You reconnect like that.
It really is a beautiful thing. I have to ask you a question. We talked about something before we came out in the show. And, I fully expected we would spend our time talking about theater, and I'm sure we'll get back to it, but I love theater. But you asked me about theater ghosts, and I think that's fascinating. You've seen some or had experience with some theater ghosts.
Yeah, I had one in Fort Worth. There was a theater there, a Scott Theater in Fort Worth. And there was a gentleman who was a technical director that unfortunately committed suicide. Yes. And the manager of the theater actually found him. He had hung himself down in the basement or the trap room of the theater. And he had even planned his death to the extent that he had unscrewed a light bulb in front so that when he was found, all you saw was the silhouette being lit from behind.
That's creepy.
Yeah, it really was. But he also, during tech rehearsals and stuff, he had a certain seat in the house. And I worked in grad school. We would do part of our productions at that theater. And we would always save that seat. That'd be the last seat we would sell in the house. And 2 instances I had with Ken, was his name. And one of them was we were doing a show and our lights went out during a scene. This was during tech. It wasn't a performance, but the lights went out during a scene. And then instead of, lights coming back up as per usual, if you had like a glitch in the power or something like that, they all came on one at a time. So it was, and the director yelled up at the kids that were running the light board up in the booth, and they said, "We're not touching anything. We're not doing a thing," So that was one. But the main encounter I had was as house manager. I got to the theater early also. And in the house itself, it was a very steep, raked seating. And about halfway down, there was a side entrance from backstage. And there was a door there that was propped open during the day by a stage weight. So it was propped open and all the lights were off. And I was coming into the theater to get to the box office. And I walked in the side door and all the lights were off. And I looked to see if I could see. I said, well, I'll go backstage and try to find the house lights or the, work lights or something. And I was feeling my way back around backstage and I couldn't find it. So I came back up to that door and I'm looking out going, well, I think maybe if I could just be real careful, I could feel my way up and not stumble and fall. And at that moment, the door slammed behind me. Had been held open with a stage weight, just slammed behind me. And I was up to the top in about 3 steps, actually.
I would imagine.
But that was my encounter with Ken, because I said, there's no way that stage weight moved.
No. It's not going to slide across the floor very easily.
Exactly. And the theater I'm working at now, they talk about the theater was named after a young woman who was an actress, and she had an early death, and they claim that she haunts that theater. I've never had an encounter with her there, but I did have another encounter at a little theater in Granbury, Texas, an old theater from the 1800s. And there was a gentleman one day, they were striking a show at the end of the run. They were, taking the sets out and changing over. And of course, the front of the theater, we'd done a matinee and it was closed and it was locked, the front door. And behind the theater at that time was the police station. And we were working backstage and all of a sudden, a policeman came backstage. He says, has anybody been out front? And we all said, no, show's over. We're back here striking the show. Sure. And he says, well, there was a guy in a long rider's coat that just came out of the theater. And he said, I went up and I checked the door. He says, it's locked. But he said, this guy came out and he said, I didn't know if somebody was in costume or what, because it looked like late 19th century. This guy, he had his cowboy hat on, his long rider's coat and stuff. And we said, that's none of us. So we had a little encounter there too.
And, and it's always when you're not thinking of it, you're not out there looking for it. It just happens and you realize, well, what was that? What did I just see,
And this summer I was at, took a trip over to London and Stratford and took that tour at Drury Lane Theater. And they have 2 ghosts there. They have, I think it's a woman in white and a man in gray that they claim one of those might be Joseph Grimaldi also is a ghost there, the famous clown. They say that actors, if they forget their lines, they've been known to feel the rear end being kicked by somebody, and that's him. But they said the other 2 ghosts would be seen in the audience a lot of times or in a box there at the theater. And they usually appear if things are not going well. If things are going well, they said they don't usually have much trouble. But every now and then, you see this figure appear. And it's kind of like, we better get it together.
Could be the ghost of a critic. I don't know.
He might be.
I don't know. It's so interesting. You talk about, if you're forgetting your lines, live theater is one of those things. Things happen. And I'd love to hear some of your moments of things that the audience probably hasn't picked up on, but you went out there and you thought, how am I going to get through this now? Because they just skipped my whole entrance and now they're 20 minutes into the show, It's fascinating.
My friend, the managing director of the Scott Theater, the one who found Ken, as a matter of fact, when he was in college, he did a production of Our Town. He was in college in Ohio, and they had as a guest artist Thornton Wilder, the playwright. And the show starts off, it says, this show is called Our Town and is written by me, he would say. And then he played the stage manager for the whole show. Well, my friend was playing a very small part, Professor Willard. He comes on, does one little bit, and then he leaves. Well, Thornton Wilder skipped over him, just completely skipped that passage, and said when he walked off stage, there was my friend standing in the wings. He said, I skipped right over you, didn't I? And my friend said, yes, you did. And he said, well, I'll make it up to you. He says, I'll take you out for drinks and dinner. And he said, that was much better than doing one scene on stage.
Yeah, right. Oh, my God. I remember doing a show where they just skipped my entrance. It was like they were all of a sudden they were past it. And I thought, well, now what do I do?
And I was going to say, as the actor, it's like, okay, do I go ahead and go on and make them kind of go back, or do I just say, okay, there's no information that has to be known out of my little bit or whatever?
You just, it's almost like you have to remember what everybody else is doing too, not just what you're doing,
Yeah.
what they're doing to try to, keep the show. You all sort of come together and support each other in that way because things happen. It's live theater. When we started this recording, most of our shows are live, but today is a recorded show. I hit the opening sequence for the show and said, "Oh, I never hit record. We could have done this whole show and we didn't have one." So I stopped it and I went back, start over. But you can't do that in live theater,
Well, you can sometimes, but it causes great stories for people.
Yes, I'm sure it does. And when someone can notice it, which is slight, it's almost amusing. People love bloopers. They love that kind of thing, Well,
our famous blooper when we were doing Christmas Carol was the great Maureen Brennan was playing Christmas Past and Mrs. Cratchit for several years, quite a few years with us. And one day she had a little bit of business she would do where she had a rag in her pocket she would pull out, and she'd be cleaning furiously in her little kitchen area, and she'd be talking about Mr. Scrooge, about that I forget all the words she uses, but they're all terrible words, scoundrel,
sure,
a whole list anyway. Well, she reached in her pocket, she didn't have a rag, and it threw her off, and so she started the list, and she got like about 3 out, and then she kind of went blank, and then she came out with wonderful Mr. Scrooge. And George Dvorsky was playing the Ghost of Christmas Present, and we're there watching her. And both of us were like biting our lips a little bit when she came out with that.
Yeah.
And of course she's a big stone face. So, she just completely cracked up herself, basically is what happened. But when we came back the next performance, both George and myself got little scraps of fabric, and I had in my pocket and he had. So when we got to that moment, we both kind of pulled these little rags out, holding them just in case she didn't have one. And that even cracked her up worse.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell you a funny story because this is another one of those theater stories. Now, I was playing Frankie in Forever Plaid.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a fun show.
Yeah.
But I can sing my way. I can sort of read music, but I'm not a musician. And there's a point in the show where Frankie counts off the orchestra. 1, 2, Well, unfortunately, the orchestra listened to me. And it was so fast, it was like we were on speed singing the song. And I think it's right before the intermission. And we got backstage, and one of the guys said, "What happened to you?" They were trying to catch up, and I thought, "Oh my God, it's hysterical." Yeah, so the director said, "Don't listen to him. Don't listen to him. He'll count you. It doesn't matter how fast he goes. Just do your own thing."
I can't remember the guy's name. He was the music director for Ringling Brothers. And he had a whole recording of circus music. And a friend of mine, when they would come to town, this is in Nashville, and he was a musician. He would play with the circus orchestra when they'd come to town. They'd sub in, some local musicians. And this guy, he'd always do the same joke to him. He said, the newbies would get such a kick out of it. He says, "Okay, I'll count you off. 1, 2, 3 measures, 4 measures," and they'd be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa,"
So, yeah. Oh my gosh. It's just funny, the stuff that happens, and it's just completely comes out of left field. You never thought about it. You never thought it was going to happen.
And you had to be a musician to do that role. My gosh, come on now, with those harmonies and all.
We can sing through the harmonies, but I can't play a piano. I'm not a conductor. You know what I mean? It's that kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. I can get the notes. Some of us get them easier. I can read music, but I can't tell you what a C sounds like until I got to play it. You know what I mean? Okay, now I know it and I'll remember it. But when it comes to, I'm following the conductor. You know what I mean? I'm following the music director when we're going with timing. And And I probably was just in the, in the thrill of it. I'm having a great time. What?
Hey, 1, 2, 3.
We were off, and that was it.
And then the other guys, their eyes get real big. It's like, what? Here we go now.
Looking at each other, going, "What?" It was like we were all on speed. It was incredible. Oh gosh,
Working with musicians can be that way. When I toured in Annie Get Your Gun, we had 2 semi country and western stars in it. And our female lead, her name was Helen Cornelius, and it was her band. They rescored the show for a country and western band, and she would come in, and the music director was a regular music theater, conductor, and she played piano. She played the piano part. Well, all the rest of the guys were playing, big note songbook, chords. So she came in, the lead. And she told her band, she goes, "I feel good tonight. Let's take it up a step." So the show starts and her first number starts and everybody's playing in a different key. And the conductor, the music director is like, "What the hell's going on?" The guy says, "Take it up a step." Like, so here she is trying to transpose the show and got to a song called Moonshine Lullaby that had 4 backup singers, guys that sing a 4th higher than she does. And their eyes got really big because they had never sung that high before, and they had a little come to Jesus meeting after the intermission saying, we don't change the keys in this show. But she was, a musician who was used to having her own band and be like,
right.
"Yeah, voice feels good. Let's go up a step tonight.
I can do it. Yeah.
And all the guys is like, no big deal. We're just playing chords. But so, you can get caught that way too.
What's interesting though is how did it never happen in all those rehearsals we did? We did plenty of rehearsals, and that never happened until whatever night it was in the show. Probably opening night because
adrenaline and the good audience and all that.
Adrenaline. You know what it's like when you're rehearsing in front of a theater and there's nobody in it.
Oh yeah.
It changes. It changes it 100%.
I worked at a theater in Houston, and the company told me that their artistic director, if you were doing a comedy or a farce, that they said if you had a good joke or a good bit of business that you wanted to do, you never did it until you got almost through the tech process, because if you did it early, it would be funny to him. And then by the time you got to the opening, it was no longer funny to him because he'd heard it so many times. It was just a line. And then it would be like, well, let's cut that. It's not funny. And it'd be like, it is funny if you hear it one time, Yeah,
that's it. How many weeks of rehearsal do you go through for a show like this?
Now, Christmas Carol, we do 2 weeks of rehearsal, and that's
done it so many times as well.
That's a usual thing, really, in stock theater. Now, the show I'm doing now is what they call a LORT theater, League of Resident Theater contract, and with that, we get a luxury. We have 4 weeks of rehearsal and a full week of tech rehearsal. So we had 5 weeks to prepare this show, and then we only play it for like 2 or 3, after you open. And then there's a theater in Fort Worth I work at where I started as a kid at Casa Mañana, which is a stock theater. And they've cut it down to where you have 10 days of rehearsal and 10 days of playing the show. So in a 3-week time, you enter, meet people, and you've done the show and you've closed it in 3 weeks. It's really fast. Yeah.
That's really fast. But, your rehearsal schedule, it's your job. So you're doing...
you're doing all day. It's a regular day.
All day. If you're doing something and you're trying to fit a real job, when I say a real job, like you work 9 to 5 somewhere else and then you're trying to do it at night. It's tough. You need a lot.
It is very tough.
To get through. And then you're learning lines and the music and I don't know. I've got
theaters are getting better about this. Theaters are getting better about this. Now, I don't know if there's any changes at North Shore or not, but I know this theater in Dallas, they have changed their whole way of operation.
Oh.
Now for years you got Mondays off is what you got. And then the week that you opened, you didn't even get Monday off. You went straight through, tech and all of that. Now we rehearse what they call straight 6s, which would be like 12 to 6. you'll come in for rehearsal at noon and you get off at 6 o'clock, and you get your 5 and 10 minute breaks throughout the day, but you also have a 20-minute break in the middle of the day. So that's kind of like your big break.
Right.
And you get out at 6 o'clock. So you go home and have a regular evening with your family or whatever. And then we also would get off Sunday and Mondays while you're in rehearsals. So you had one day that you literally could rest, and the next day to actually get everything done that you didn't get done during the week, instead of having to do it all in one day. So,
but too, you come home and you're still doing it, because if you're going to learn lines, you can't learn them all.
No, you have to do it at home. Yeah.
It's a lot of work that people don't see. And it's, people think that you just sort of appear on stage and it's just, wow, everybody's just where they need to be. That's all choreographed and blocked.
But at least we're getting rich, right? That's the
most important thing.
I'll sit backstage doing some shows. Well, like Christmas Carol, after I do all my makeup and everything, I'll be sitting there and I'll say to, usually the guy playing Marley shares dressing with me. And I turned to Alex and I said, if it wasn't for the glamour, I'd give up this business.
So what motivates you? What is your motivation? What is it about theater that just drives you?
Well, I've done it for 54 years.
Wow.
And if I didn't do it, I wouldn't know what to do. COVID was really, really something, because that was the first time I'd ever had that much time not doing a show. And it gives me some place to go. I have to be somewhere. I have my family to see, when you're going to do a show.
Right.
And it engages the mind. You're thinking about the show. You're thinking about how you're going to play this role, how you're going to improve this scene, how you're going to, time that joke, how you're going to do this. So it keeps you completely involved with the world. And if you ever stop, it's a horrible thing for people when they have to. That's why, God bless her, Angela Lansbury was able to work almost right up to the end and stayed fresh that way her whole life because of it.
Yeah, she was quite the talent. And you're 96 years old. you know it's going to happen sooner or later, but you think someone like that who's lived that long, and it seems like she was just in Boston not that long ago. She was talking through I used to work in the city, and there was a sign right near where I work. I think it was the Historical Society, or there was something in Boston. She came and she gave a talk, and I thought, wow, she's still traveling and doing this. And then, that's it,
Well, and the show I'm working on now, that I'm playing in now, we actually had to have an actor replaced. He was an older actor, and he had been injured. He was a veteran. He'd been injured, and he was on a walker. So we'd made a lot of changes to the show to make it work for him.
Sure.
But he was having a horrible time getting his lines. He just couldn't get them. And we've spent extra time running his scenes to help him out, to get it into his body and all that. Mm-hmm. And he would finally get it. And then you'd come back the next day and it wasn't there. And so finally, they said, it's not going to work. Sorry. And let him go. And I said, it was just, heart-wrenching to me, because I know that day comes. Michael Gambon, the British actor who took over the Dumbledore role after Richard Harris passed away.
Right.
Several years ago, he made an announcement. He was supposed to do a show in London, and he says, I'm retiring from the stage. He says, it's just too much stress on me. He says, I'll still do film and television. He says, where I don't have to, carry the show and, have to know my lines and go straight through and all of that. He says, it's just, I'm at the point now. He says, I have so much trouble with my lines. He says, I don't want to put myself through that much stress or anybody else. So he says, I'm retiring. So I hope that day doesn't come, but it may sometime for me.
But, I think that live theater adrenaline rush, the audience, the applause, and all of that is what drives.
Oh, it's a tonic. It's a tonic.
It's that thing that pushes you out on stage. And, if you have stage fright, at least for me, you get out there, the lights are in your face, and the next thing you know, you're no longer that person having stage fright. You're whoever you are on that stage, and it changes everything, and it just drives you through the whole performance.
And then when you have one of those wonderful audiences that are so responsive that you as an actor can relax a little bit because you say, okay, they're taking part of the load. That's when you really feel great.
And then you have the other, it's like, did somebody pass out Sominex before they walked into the theater? Like, hello, what's going on, folks,
We always used to dread Sunday matinees. Now they're some of the best audiences around. Now Friday nights are usually the worst audiences because everybody's worn out. But we always used to dread Sundays because we always called it roast beef and Jesus. Everybody had been to church and had a big lunch and they were ready for a nap when we did our show.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I did a show, and I don't know what it was, a matinee or what it was. And it was one of those things where just pass out pillows. They were out. It was quiet. And I ran into someone I knew, and it's contagious. If the person next to you is not loud, you don't want to be the loud one. So she comes up to me after the show and she says, "That show was fantastic." I said, "Oh my God, everybody was so quiet." She says, "Yeah, I had to really try hard not to laugh out loud."
Yes.
Right, well,
I've heard that line. I almost laughed out loud.
Yeah. I wish you had. It's just, it is what it is. I had called a friend of mine to co-host a show with me. Julie is usually with me and she's wonderful. But as I told you, she's having her COVID shot today. And
I got mine a couple of weeks ago, and I always plan to have the next day off because usually it'd be like the flu, just drain me out of any energy for a day. But this one didn't affect me that way. I don't know what happened, but it didn't affect me.
And usually I don't get that. And this one did. I had it last week and I'm fine now. But like a day later, it was just, you
feel blah for the whole day. And then you're fine the next day. But that one day after, usually it just like you pulled the plug and drained out all of your energy.
Yeah. But I had called my friend Pat. She lives in New York City. She's union and she's done some great shows and TV and everything. But many, many years ago, because and this made me think of this, because you were talking about the gentleman that needed to be replaced. We were doing a show and the lead woman was replaced we opened on Friday. So this would have been Wednesday night. And this woman that I tried to, and I don't know if she had rehearsals or something. She wasn't available today, kind of last minute. She came in and she took over that role. We didn't even know it. It was Wednesday night. On Friday, she showed up for the performance and did the whole thing. Music. I don't know how she did it. The woman's remarkable. If you ever get a chance to work with Patricia Lawrence, she's a true professional. She's amazing. Okay. Yeah, she's in New York now. She used to be here in Massachusetts, but she and her husband, they moved to New York, and now she's all over the place. So good for her. So
that amazes me when people can do that.
I don't know how they do it. I mean, I have to. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you do it. I record my lines and then I go through and I'm, answering, and I'm going to record other lines and trying to answer back just to have that interaction. It's remarkable that someone can do that like that and just pick up.
Well, I'm still at that point where I usually can read them and do them, because one thing I did learn is I don't learn my lines for most shows before I start rehearsals. I'll read the show a bunch of times, so I'm very familiar with the lines, but I don't try to learn them because now if I have a soliloquy or a speech like I'm doing Shakespeare, I'll learn that.
Sure.
But for scenes, I don't, because inevitably when I hear the other actor deliver the line to me, it's never the way I heard it when I was trying to learn the line. And so I said, it's easier for me to just wait and learn it when I've worked with somebody rather than trying to unlearn what I had already placed in my head.
And don't you think too, it's not sometimes the line. I mean, it is the line, but it's also where they are when they say it.
Totally.
If they're in the wrong place and they're standing on stage, stage left, and they say it, it's not right. You know what I mean? You have to kind of, wait a minute, you need to say that over here or it doesn't trigger me the right way.
I learned, that's the other way I learn my lines is through blocking. So you put it in your muscles. So it's like, okay, when I'm doing this, I'm saying this. And, that can help you a lot of times, especially early on when you're trying to get off book, that if you have your blocking and your business together, you say, okay, it just all connects. When I'm doing this, I'm going to say this, and that helps tremendously.
It helps a lot. And that's why I think what you say, learning lines ahead of time isn't always that helpful. It becomes much easier as you get into the show.
We always laugh doing stock theater. It's always said, when you work with stars, it's like they come in and they have their show already set. I'm sure that's the way they feel about me doing Scrooge now after all these years. They go, oh, the star, he's got it set. We have to work around him, or whatever. But that's the way we were. It'd be like, okay, that's the way you're going to do that line? Okay, then I need to respond this way.
I'll tell you a funny story. I had, this is many, many years ago. I had done a cabaret, and in the cabaret, we had played a song called Vacation from the show Pump Boys and Dinettes.
Okay.
And there were 4 of us that learned that song. No musicians at all. It was all a cappella. So a short time later, there's a theater that's going to do that show. We showed up for auditions, and all 4 of us were there. And there was a point when we were in this room together and the 4 of us started singing that song. People actually got up and walked out. They said, that's it. We're out of here. And it wasn't a given, it just wasn't a given. But the fact that we sounded like that, and we had an edge for sure. We got casted. It was a lot of fun. That was a fun show too. Do you do other stuff besides theater? I mean, you do TV. You've done TV stuff a little bit, or
I never have done much TV. I've done lots of interview television shows. Because for 7 years I toured for the Jack Daniel distillery. We had a group. It was a band, a creation of a turn of the century town band. The act was called Mr. Jack Daniel's Original Silver Cornet Band was the name of it. Yeah. And it ran from the mid 70s into probably the late 90s or early 2000s. And I was with them from 1985 through 1991. Mm-hmm. And we toured all over the country and played every kind of venue you could imagine. I mean, we played everything from the Newport Music Festival down in Rhode Island, out to the Bohemian Club in San Francisco, private club. We played a Resorts International Hotel in Atlantic City. I mean, we played, and the next night we'd be in a cafetorium in Kansas someplace, at a junior high. Yeah. So, I mean, we played all over the country and lots of television and radio interviews during that in particular.
Yep, that's great. Mr. Coffee, we have spent almost an hour together, and it's hard to believe because the time has sort of flown by. We have about 2 minutes left. I want to remind people that they can come see you. If they're in Massachusetts, you're going to be at the North Shore Music Theater playing Scrooge again in A Christmas Carol. And if you're here and you have a chance to be here and see that show, you don't want to miss it. But that's also, right. You're going to be in Texas did you say it was in Arlington? No.
It's in Dallas. Trouble in Mind. It's the Dallas theatercenter.org. And then North Shore is NSMT, North Shore Music Theater.org.
And I'm going to make sure I have my ticket so I can come see you again, because that's always a pleasure.
Fantastic. Well, here I have, if you can see, I'm in Christmas Carol Corner here.
I do see.
House, Very nice. Have all these things that people have given me over the years. Wow. That's you can't imagine the collection. It's really something. And this year, when I went to London, I did a tour. I had a map, and I actually did a walking tour that followed the places that inspired Dickens for the story. And it was really fascinating.
That's great. Was it just a vacation, or were you performing there?
It was a vacation. I went, it was the first class vacation I'd planned for 2 years. And I flew over first class, went to Stratford for 3 days, London 4 nights, and came home on the Queen Mary 2. So it was wonderful.
Wow. When were you there? Was it this summer?
Yep. End of July and 1st of August. So it was just a marvelous, marvelous trip.
That's great. I should have come visit you. I was there in July itself, but I think I probably was already home before you left. I was in I was in Scotland.
Well, you got caught in the heat wave.
Oh my gosh!
I was there right after. It was lovely when I was there.
Yeah, it was just crazy. So we have about 30 seconds left. I just want to thank you so much for being here. Next week, folks, we're going to be talking to Rob Sakowitz from Get Haunted. He is a man that he and his company, they set up these locations all around the country where you can go and investigate the paranormal safely with people who are experts and know what they're doing. Thank you so much, Mr. Coffee. It has been an absolute pleasure, and we're going to see you in the theater. Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.
You have been listening to The Paranormal Project with Scott Allen and Julie Finn. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. While you're there, leave us a rating and review so others can find out about the show. Stay haunted and go out there and explore the paranormal.